were. But as people begin to wake up and then they start looking at the rabbit holes and they get
states. And so I just want to put a few facts there that, in my experience, not too many people are aware of, and that the United States have a constitution. And under that constitution, were that event to happen, and were the sitting guy in control, shall we say, were to concede in that situation, then they would be guilty of high treason, and that is punishable by death.
Wow,
now,
right.
We know.
The thing is, they're sovereign, but they're not acting like they've got a constitution in America at all. That's what federal law is meant to be, that applies to the whole of America, or there's no point having it. But for example, they're not allowed to make any laws up, really, to mess around with the petitioning process. Yet, we've got this campaign in Atlanta at the moment where they've got all these ridiculous rules and regulations which are different to the rest of the United States. How does a state make the legislature of the state make these laws when Congress can't make any laws around this? So how can a state? Because Congress can't make any ridiculous rules and regulations, for example, to make it, extremely hard to do petitioning. Like, all these ridiculous rules are pulling out in Atlanta, like, you've got to have a witness when you're signing next to you and all this ridiculous stuff. Congress can't make a law, so no state can start making all these laws, because that's what that Constitution is meant to protect from. And if you look at the Bill of Rights, it stops councillors and ministers and judges from any type of manipulation or intervention, subverting the liberties of the realm. In Atlanta, they are subverting the liberties of the realm because they're making systems that are they're making the local people jump through hoops, and they're making a process that is not equal or comparable to the rest of the states. So that's not a constitution, because a constitution is meant to be applied to that's why it's the United States of America with federal law. That's why they have a president. That's one example of how they're just completely ignoring that now. And my next video that I'm going to go on is this freedom of the press, because they're claiming that, Marianne Williamson or JFK can't go on the main channels or won't have them on. Well, from understanding the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech in there, and the fact that all these liberties are laid out in relation to the liberties of the realm, particularly in relation to when you are bringing actions to the government for elections or petitions, anything in connection with getting an action from the government of any form. The freedom of the press is figured into the Constitution in America it's grouped in together with petition, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press. They're all kind of linked in together. Now, the thing is that in the Bill of Rights, in the British one, we've got the freedom of speech, and it does say in relation to speaking anything that is, debatable or that is going to be debated, politically debatable. Now, the freedom of the press in the American Constitution is grouped in that First Amendment with those. Now, the press kind of the press are always acting like, the press, we've got freedom to do what we want. I might as well do this freedom of the press video now, because I've started talking about it, although I just wanted a different picture up on the screen while I was talking about it, because The Hill channel have done a video, The Hill, talking about the fact that JFK and Marianne Williamson, they haven't had them on the main stations, because they'll basically whoop the main parties. They if it was a fair contest, then they would completely and totally win outright. There's no doubt about it. If you look at the BBC, no matter what is being, said about the BBC currently, for or against them, it was it's one of the, the first emergence of radio and TV, and it was meant to be paid for by the taxpayer. And there's that whole kind of mission statement claiming that it's to inform, educate, and entertain. And the other thing that, like Terry Wogan was always saying, public service broadcasting. And that's what broadcasting was really in the early days, this public service broadcasting. And this is why newspapers, when they first started out, was meant to be public service. It was meant to tell you the news, stories about what's happening, to let you know what's happening. If there's an election going on, they say, "Wow, there's an election going on. Did you know there's a few candidates?" Well, who are they? Well, we'll tell you them all. And then you're supposed to advertise in there. If you want to pay, they have a section where anyone can pay to advertise in there. But they also had a public notices section, which was for people to put public notices. It was a way for anyone to put a public notice. It was because they'd invented the press. You just didn't, it's a step further than having like the village notice board. And when they granted the freedom of the press, when they were granted it under the Constitution of America and also the Bill of Rights, notice that all the freedom of speech and the right to petition and the freedom of the press are all grouped in together, right? And there's a reason for that you've got a right to send a letter in the post to anyone, and you've got a right to pick the telephone up and call someone. Now, the press, like the BBC, to form, educate and entertain. I know the BBC was meant to be paid for by the taxpayer. Newspapers were privately owned, but we need to look at what the service is first. What is this? What is this service? A shoemaker makes shoes. You could say, well, I only make children's shoes, or I only make, women's shoes, or I only make whatever shoes. But that's a manufacturer. A shoe shop is meant to stock shoes. Now, you can be a manufacturer of women's shoes, or of, large, like huge size shoes, or of Wellington boots, or you can be a manufacturer, but the seller, the shop, is meant to be a shoe shop, right? So when you go in there, they're meant to usually have all different sort of shoes. But really, unless it's super specialist, unless you want to specialise, it was meant to be for everything. They didn't really, they weren't meant to discriminate or whatever. The ministers have been making all these discrimination laws, and it always seems whenever you need it now, they're saying, oh yeah, well, it didn't apply to that, or it didn't apply to that. Well, it does, because it applies to business, so it can not discriminate against the customer. It applies, it doesn't apply in private because you're not providing a service, and you aren't in public. As soon as you walk out of the house and you're in the streets, you're in public, they've got public notice boards everywhere. You provide a service to the public. Who else would you provide a service to? I mean, who do you open your doors in a shop to? Now, newspapers, if you want to provide, it's a little bit like electricity. Why would you want to have an electricity company, right? You want one because you want to provide electricity to people. You don't have an electricity company to not provide electric to people. It evades the point. Now, really, to make business and sell, you want to be getting as many people to buy electric from you as possible. You don't want to be, getting people not to. It would have been ridiculous to say, well, we only want to supply, women, electricity to women or to men. There are laws now, against things like this. So they provide electricity. Now, newspapers provide the press. If you don't want a newspaper to tell people what's going on, then don't start a newspaper company. I'd say to Rupert Murdoch, you're in the wrong business. Why didn't you, start making widgets, or, start making picture frames? The press is meant to tell people what's happening, and also it provides advertising where anyone can place an advert, which I argued that with London Evening Standard and won using 5013C, illegal campaign intervention, because it is intervening in a campaign to deny access. There are arguments now over YouTube. It doesn't matter if YouTube's privately owned or not, because the thing is, if you use a device to stop someone else from accessing politics or a campaign or obstruct them or in any way, it's making, and this is what they say with the election campaign video, you know, you can't use YouTube to intervene in campaigns. Well, this is the thing. If you've got something in your hand, a device, and you've got there's any political activities going on that people are doing, and you are using this device to stop certain people from engaging in a political process, no matter where it is or what it is, or communicating with each other, it's actually not the fact of what they're using to communicate or who owns the website or what group or forum it is in at all. The fact is that you do something which actually results in, at the other end, where the other person, wherever the other person sat, stood, or is, doesn't matter whether they're in public or in their own house or wherever, if you use a device or tool which prevents another person from engaging politically, communication-wise, or getting signatures or doing anything, it's your action that is resulting in an effect. So it's you yourself, your own act. You're responsible for your own action. So it doesn't actually matter if YouTube themselves, it doesn't matter if YouTube themselves are private or not. The fact is that Neil Mohan does something himself that is obstructing, hindering your political communication or stopping you from being politically engaged or effective. That's actually what it is down to. So you're actually suing the YouTube people. You need to forget about, you know, the company or whatever, you know, whether it's, forget LLC, forget the company, forget Alphabet, forget Google, YouTube. We're talking about individuals. That's why if Neil Mohan is in YouTube and he punches someone in the face, that's a felony in law. Well, I'm in YouTube, it's private. I'm the CEO. So what? You just threw your fist through the air, hit someone, and punched them. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's in private or not. These are the laws. He acted, he lifted a finger to politically neutralise someone, to politically neutralise them and disengage them and also hinder them. And this is what their election campaign, well, they call it misinformation, but it says you can't use YouTube to disrupt political actions. Well, that's what they're doing. What you're actually doing is you need to take action against the people, the individuals. You need them all named, the staff, because that's who it is, and that's what it's all about. Just like illegal actions, it's the right to petition, and all prosecutions and commitments are illegal. But commitments, or else how could you have 5013C illegal political campaign intervention? Means that there's some act going on. It's an intervention. So you're actually taking action against the people who lifted the finger to do these things, you know? That's what you're doing. So the thing is that when we go back to these newspapers, the reason why they were invented and the purpose of them was to tell everyone what's going on so everyone knew what was happening, not tell people what was going on, right? And in elections, there was a certain, if you look at the law, there are required notices, legally required notices, and these legally required notices are the council and certain other groups, parties and people have got to publish. There's a legal requirement to publish at least one major newspaper. And that is where this law revolves around. In fact, if you think of, when you've got Jeremy Vine, when Jeremy Vine is stood there and he's got all his graphs and charts and all his, and there's an election taking place, they've got to... They can't, when they've got the statistics coming in and they show all the graphs and charts of while they're collecting the ballots, right? They show who's in the lead and who's not, right? So how can these MSNBC and other programs cover the election, right? They can't cover it if they don't want to, if they don't want to, to say the word Marianne Williamson or have it on the screen, because they've got to, because she's in the election and so forth. Now, the thing is, the boundaries, the extent of what this election process is, it's like any legal case, the police investigation part, the whole thing, that is what these political people are doing when they are doing their 2024 president promo election. They're telling people why they should vote for them. And then when they've informed them why they should vote for them, then they go and vote for them, who they want to vote for. And the news shows you who is leading or not, right? Now, if the news is covering the elections, either they completely don't cover the whole thing or they have to cover everyone who's in it. Now, the fact is that they're trying to pretend that, this is not the election. Well, it is. This is the preliminary proceedings and part of the election. So what they're doing is they're breaking the law. And all of what I've said about the different factors and areas of it, the BBC, we could say the BBC have been slyly biased or whatever, but they haven't meant to have been. The whole basis and premise is claimed that they are impartial. So at least they've got this basis that claims it's impartial. And that's really what all of the press are meant to be, although you've got people who own certain newspapers who are favourable to certain causes, and that's why you say this is more this and that. In magazines, all right, if it's a racing car magazine, you're not going to have fishing in there, right? But that's a racing car magazine, We're talking about news. And this is why you've got certain rules and regulations for news programmes like with Rees-Mogg when there's arguments over it, because they say, no, it's not news, it's just a casual talk show. But yet, Nigel Farage walks out from that channel with a news award, we play a tape of, Rees-Mogg speaking, and it sounds like he's delivering the news. In fact, he delivers the same type of information that they've got on the news. That is around the same sort of argument we've got now with this Marianne Williamson thing. It's a similar area. That's what it comes down to, and the whole, what all of this rests on? At the moment, because David Cameron wanted to sell everything off, and they're even trying to get the BBC sold off, then that means that there wouldn't be anything impartial, or there wouldn't be a public notice board, or there wouldn't be really a newspaper that was telling you what's happening. There would be not telling you what's happening. It would be what's the... You don't describe the news as the news is people who tell you they deliver events that they want you to hear, so that in order to make it look like only certain things are happening and ignore everything else. That's not telling you what's going on. That's not telling you what's happening. And unfortunately, that's what's ended up happening. This is what's sad about the BBC, because the whole idea behind it, the whole premise of it is actually good. It's meant to be impartial. That's what you want. And it's meant to be public service. It was meant to be good, but because it was controlled by, corrupt government and so forth, it did end up being bad. And I like the BBC, but I'll call it out when it's doing wrong. In fact, the BBC should be coming out now and doing something against all these independent channels, which are completely, totally warping things. But the fact is, everyone now is completely polarised to different opinions. And the fact that everyone's got a voice, it's become apparent now that everyone has very, very different opinions, and those opinions are not... everyone's got so many different opinions now that it will be very difficult for them to support one party or the other, because, you know, these political parties that they supported now are fractured. You know, people are really expressing their own opinions, and people, like, you know, have very mixed and contradictory opinions when it comes to all aligning enough to form parties and groups, which means that really you can't really have political parties now, because everyone has got their opinion over such a diverse spectrum of subjects that it's like winning the lottery. You need to match all the balls to win, and no political party is going to match all the balls. And I don't think people want to vote for any of these parties anymore, because they're not going to win with them. You know, they're never going to match 2 points or two. It's like matching one ball on the lottery, or matching 2 or 3 balls. You're never going to win the jackpot. You're never going to get a party who represents you. So therefore, the only real option now for the future, and the MPs are going to have to accept this, is that they're going to have to let us vote on individual things. And they're going to have to let us vote on individual matters, like... taxes, and like on, you know, free speech and the law, and on, you know, immigration, and on, health, National Health Service, things like that. Because otherwise, you're voting for something where they're not doing the things that would. It's literally like trying to. It's like I'm almost getting like the wrong cable for your phone. You know, it doesn't fit. You know, your vote. If you cast a vote to a party that doesn't fit what you would really like to happen, then you are not really casting a vote. No electrician would make a cable where, like, you know, you've got 12 pins and only 8 of them work or fit, because it's defective. And there's no point having a defective vote, because then the political parties really are trying to get power into their party, when really those people don't really advocate everything that party's doing. And then they're always going to have complaints. The only real way forward now is to have you vote for on the things that matter to you, and you vote, in favour of, your opinion on each thing. Otherwise, it's all wasted voting on these major parties. And what's going to happen with that is there's going to be a very, very dramatic change in what happens. And these companies have built they've built up billions, trillions on game votes, when really you stuck a 12-pin power plug into them to give them power. You've charged your MP and you've given power to a political party who can empower a prime minister, when really of your 12-pin connector, you only really had 8 pins connected. So he's running off kind of like free power. He's running on more authority and power that you would really want to give him, but you don't really have no option, you know? And no electrician or computer programmer has ever done that. And what they're trying to do is they want a world that runs on everything electronic. Bluetooth, smartphones, computers, electric cars. They want it all digital. Now, if their digital things were only running on connectors and cables and Bluetooth that wasn't really plugged in properly and didn't work, it would be faulty. It's like faulty towers. So all this power they've got, all this reserves, all what they've done has actually been free coasted on really loaned or consented false consent. And now they can't handle it. They don't like it. They're going to lose the power, Bezos, Musk, Zuckerberg, the army, tanks, Putin, all of these people, Bill Gates, the power's about to be cut. And what they're doing is, it's like on Die Hard, they're now holding us to terror. They're using terrorist action on us and they're intimidating us through their advertisements. They're badgering us and they're actually harassing us with their devices, making them slow us down and be un-user friendly because they're annoyed with us. They're bullying us. And then they're using all manner of things like, God knows what, we don't know where all these viruses, suddenly it's all happening now. And then the weather, all these weather events and strange incidents, they don't want to give it up. It's almost like the school bully taking things off you, and then when you all stand up to him, he's lashing out and striking back. Bill Gates, I think Bill Gates, what would he do to keep his money? He's all in about Minesweeper. It's mine. Minesweeper, buying up all the land. If he had to give it back, is he prepared to kill to do that? Is he? And if he's not going to do it himself, is that the role now of these military forces like Putin and so forth? Is Putin like the non-official bailiff? Is Putin fulfilling some sort of bailiff role that he doesn't want to be, he doesn't want to officially be acting on behalf of all of the government's elite, but they need a bad guy to, come around and collect, rough us up a bit, get us back in line. The Tory whips, we need a bad guy character. We can't do it ourselves because then, the public won't vote for us. So we need to scapegoat it out to someone else. It has to be Putin or China. This is it. So, but going, I guess I've kind of gone off the point of this, the freedom of the press. Look, freedom of the press, there's an interpretation when you read that. And from all my research and all the research that we've got from the professionals, you have to go back to see what was intended at the start. What did it mean at the start, and has it been at some point misunderstood, perverted, or misconstrued? And therefore, if the meaning of it, of what it is meant to mean, is clear, then we know what it actually is for. And that is that I believe, and all the evidence points to in the original enactments and why they were enacted and the circumstances around them being enacted and their purpose and function, is that the words freedom of the press, it doesn't just mean people who own newspapers are free to inform you on things. It actually means the press is free to everyone. It means freedom to access the press, not only freedom to use the press, the freedom of use of the press, the freedom to access the press, the freedom to publish, the freedom to print. Now, the newspaper people use this clause to mean that, you can't restrict them, you can't stop us from telling people what's happening, what's going on. You can't stop us, the newspapers, us from telling you stories. You can't stop us from having a newspaper. You can't stop us from, all this intel and what Russell Brand's talking about, getting ExpressVPN to stop the newspapers tapping phone. They were spying on Merkel. George Galloway has just put a programme out where they were spying on Merkel, the German Prime Minister, from the embassy. He's just published that video and he said that they were listening in on her, right? We know that they're listening on everyone. And the newspapers, had Elton John bugged, the whole thing, Cliff Richard, the whole idea behind Wired for Sound. It's well known that Elton John was bugged by the newspapers. The newspapers think they're free to do these things, although there's been lots of cases. They believe that they got the right to know anything and inform you on it and report on it. They think that that's what the words freedom of the press means. But what they don't actually want to acknowledge and admit as part of that freedom of press is not just the person who owns it. What is the press? if you know what the press is, then you know what's free about it. The press is the notice board. And it's not just a matter of the BBC being public service broadcasting. The press, the newspaper, is not a... If it's a newspaper, like what Rees-Mogg is not meant to be allowed to give the news, if it's just a casual chat show, apparently Rees-Mogg can be on there, but not if it's the news. Now, we're talking about news programmes and the newspapers, right? So, these news programmes are meant to tell you the news and give you the news, which is what Jeremy Vine's doing when he's doing his graphs and charts. Now, if it is news, then they actually cannot stop you from being in the newspaper or promoting. And in fact, that's why they have different sections in there. They have the news section, they have the social section, but then they've got adverts, which is meant to be anyone can publish in there. But they've also got notice boards. That's why it's called legal. And public notices. If you've got a section that is said public notices, if you're not actually publishing public notices or allowing people to publish public notices, it ain't public notices. It's got to be what it's declared as. It's a declaration. This section is declared for public notices. Now, that's your public's freedom to access the press, because it has to be inclusive of somewhere where the public has the freedom to access the press. That's why you have public notices. Legal notices, there's a legal requirement under British law for you to publish, not on your arse cheek, not in the village centre. It says in the legislation at least one major newspaper. Now, if Mary Ann Williamson and RFK have to publish in at least one national newspaper, how are they not having him in the national news, whether it's print or broadcast? It is the same as Jeremy Vine stood there with a graph behind him. That is the extent of which Mary Ann Williamson and RFK must be publicised, and not less. Not less, at least one. And actually, you could say that, well, they're getting on, YouTube now and so forth. Well, if there is actually a definition that we can go on, there's a definition in law, and it actually uses the term made at least one national or major publication. Now, therefore, what is the current consensus to what that is and what they are? And I would say that that's what this argument is over. They're still referring to these channels as the major broadcast channels or the major publications. So they clearly are the ones, the major newspaper, The Guardian, The Sun, The Daily Mail. They're the major national newspapers. List them, right? And what are the major broadcasts on TV? BBC ITV, Channel 4, still. Those are major broadcasting channels which cover the elections. And this current part of them telling people what they will do for them is part of that. You can't separate it from actually counting the votes, right? So the Americans need to wake up, because if you look at that Eldred 1 and Eldred 2 case, they've completely screwed up the whole copyright law, for example, with all their legal cases. Anyway, the Eldred 1 and Eldred 2 case, it's got nothing to do with political rights. It's actually about freedom of the press in printing. They tried to claim that the Mickey Mouse law, which is actually a law which extends the duration of a copyright. Like a copyright in America only lasts for a lifetime, and this law extended it to last for a bit longer. And they challenged the government through the courts that Congress shall make no law to restrict the freedom of the press. They were saying that extending copyrights restricts their freedom because, if a copyright runs out, then people are meant to be free to use and publish things. You know, they said they had some infringement on it. I'm starting to wonder whether or not the concept of a copyright protection is actually against freedom of the press and freedom of free speech, because in a way it's a contradiction. You know, now no one's saying that, you know, people should be making money out of other people's work, profits, but you know, but this is when that fair use comes in. If you want to tell someone about it, or, you know, sample it, or, you know, if you're reporting on it, or you've got to be able to mention it. But there you go. It's inclusive of it for those reasons which freedom of the press encompasses. So that you've got the crossover for, you know, reasonable and fair use, which means that, you know, you're not trying to make money out of it. You're informing people, or, you know, and this is it. With the political rights, there's actually, when they're running to be elected and they are going to be a representative, it's like when they said Donald Trump, you know, in fact, Jimmy Dore said the other day that Donald Trump, you cannot, you can't block people, because they have to be responsible. Officials in government have to be responsible, right? You have to be able to contact them because they're providing a service to taxpayer, right? It's like it has aspects of that in the press. As soon as you are a candidate, the press are responsible, and they can't be exclusive. It can't be exclusive. It has to be inclusive, because you are an official candidate who's running, and they have to inform you of what's going on, like the BBC are meant to do. And it's a legal requirement for these main press it's a legal requirement for if you're running for election, it really, they can't, you might choose not to, but really, you know, this is the thing about issuing statements. You know, if the newspaper asks Marianne Williamson or RFK for a statement, you know, can they refuse, or do they have the right to remain silent? But they have a right to remain silent. But this is the thing. When they're running, the newspaper doesn't have the right to refuse. And this is what I use with the Daily Mail and the London Evening Standard with 5013C, legal campaign intervention. There are things that you do have a right to do, even whether you own something or not, and there are things that you don't have a right to do. And one of those things is like with the building, with that crooked house. They demolished the building when they didn't have the right to demolish it. They owned it, but they didn't have a legal right to do it. And this is the thing that the newspapers don't like, particularly when there's lots of these events going on, lots of oppositions and so forth. They actually don't have a right to turn you down for publication, because the press is free. Freedom of the press means you have a freedom to access it, freedom of use of the press to promote. Because that also includes printing yourself. You've got the right to ask a printer to print up your leaflets so you can distribute them. Can you imagine if, you know, the newspapers refused to publish something and they refused to have it on TV and radio, so then you went to get some leaflets printed and the printer refused to print them? That's press, freedom of access to the press. So what are you going to do? Sit at home to print your own? Well, what happens if they refuse to sell you the ink and refuse to sell you the paper? You wouldn't have access. You wouldn't be possible to promote it at all whatsoever. They're not allowed to block or obstruct you, because then they're just disassembling the whole thing, right? And that's what the Americans need to get their head around. The freedom of the press means that all citizens have freedom of access to the press. Not only that the press has their freedom themselves to not be shut down, it's actually our press. And it's not like, we're not talking about publishing a novel, right? We're talking about the newspapers. And that is why there are different rules for Mogg on the news programme in presenting when he's meant to be appearing on there as a candidate or answering to a statement, in not presenting it, because the news is not Parliament. The news reports about Parliament. The news isn't Parliament. You might as well have Rupert Murdoch as a speaker in Parliament, or the leader of the Conservatives. We're printing newspapers here, or we're making legislation. You might as well move the Sun's printing press and start knocking it out on cowskin. Like Rupert Murdoch reeling out legislation, which is basically what Extinction Rebellion was saying the other day. Like they're practically handing legislation already pre-written on a plate to the MPs and getting them to enact it, as if the newspaper printing press is like somewhere underneath Parliament, and they ain't got barrels of gunpowder, they've got barrels of ink ready to, politically neutralise everyone, with their explosive material. This is it. Parliament isn't a newspaper, and Rees-Mogg is in Parliament. He's not meant to be on a newspaper. The newspaper asks him questions. He doesn't ask the questions. He answers questions. He doesn't have his name going up and down on the graph chart of how well he's doing with Jeremy. You don't have Rees-Mogg stood there like Jeremy Vine, reporting on his own performance in his own election, saying, carry on voting for me, that's it. Come on, look how it's going up 3%. Come on, vote for me, vote for me. I mean, this is it. I mean, you might as well switch Jeremy Vine for Mogg. You might as well have Mogg there going, come on, vote for me, vote for me. Look, I only need 3 more votes, and it's coming in now, another 4, and then we're up to 5. Coming around the last corner, vote for me, vote for me, vote for me. Here's Rees-Mogg, the results are coming in quick. And carry on, 5 more votes in Essex, 5 more votes in Cirencester. Come on, vote for me, vote for me, vote for me. Here I am. This is Rees-Mogg. And the votes are coming in, they're coming in quick. It's like the fucking Grand National. This is it. You might as well have Biden on MSNBC going, vote for me, vote for me. The results are coming in quick. Don't vote for RFK, don't vote for Marianne Williamson, vote for Biden. Because I'm coming in fast, I'm coming in hard, I'm coming in quick. I'm going up like a strike of lightning. Look at that. Straight up 3 more points, and here we go. This is it. And what it's actually turned into is literally Team Biden, which is not giving you the news. That's actually reporting on how Team Biden's doing. Is this the Biden 2024 website, or is it meant to be the news? There's a legal requirement to cover the elections, or publish. There's a sewer pipe broken in the streets. There's a legal requirement, but we're not going to publish any of the Lib Dem councillor. Oh, we've got 3 Lib Dem councillors. Oh, it's a Labour controlled council. There's a broken water pipe. It's in fucking Waterlooville. Oh, we're not going to report that in the newspaper. That's a Liberal Democrats ward. We're not going to report that in the newspaper. There's a fucking broken water pipe square everywhere. Oh, we'll have to give notice in the newspaper. There's going to be repairs to it. Oh, we're not reporting that in the newspaper. It's a Lib Dem fucking ward. Fuck them. This is it. That's effectively what we've come to now. Oh, there's a legal requirement to publish in the newspaper. The Lib Dem ward is going to have a fucking water pipe fixed. Or just, oh, well, we're not going to publish that. This is it. You can't actually omit these people. They've got freedom of access to the press, freedom of the press, freedom of use of the press. The press are free, and the people are free to use it. And when it means press, it actually does mean to be able to print. Because if everyone denied you, you wouldn't actually be able, it wouldn't have freedom. You can't actually have everyone refuse you. You've got a right to do it. And it's evident when they do the results. Because actually the results and the counting and the coverage is the same and no different thing from the preliminary part of it, where they're telling you what they're going to do, so then you know who you want to vote for. The results coming in is actually inseparable from telling you why you should vote for that person in the first place to get those results. And they have to give all the results as that they are. They actually can't omit them, because that isn't covering it properly, and that's not covering the election properly, and that is actually election fraud. This is what we've got. YouTube knocking all these election misinformation. If you right, election misinformation. So if you don't inform people about who's running, right, you've given misinformation, because an incomplete information, like the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Well, you can't. What is misinformation? Well, if you get a rubber stamp and you print it, you get a rubber stamp and you dip it in ink and you print it, right? And part of it is worn off or damaged. You haven't made the proper print. It's incorrect. It's like a copyright, it's copyrighted changing an image slightly or whatever. If you don't say there's an election on and these are the people in the election and these are what all they're wanting to do, right, then you've given misinformation, because you haven't actually... Missing information, incomplete information is misinformation. Do you understand that? Incomplete information is misinformation. You might say, Parliament, the Lords like this. Oh, excluding cognition, exclusive cognizance, excluding cognition. Oh, I do a mathematic equation. 3 + 4 is 7. But what I'll do is I'll exclude it. 3 plus... I'll say 7. 3 plus something is 7. Well, I'll just leave out the 4 bit. Well, I'll publish, right. I hereby publish an accurate and correct maths sum. 3 plus something that I don't care to publish equals 7. Right, so, well, what is it? Just a minute. Could that be 4? Oh, it can only be 4. If you give me one of the numbers and then the answer, let me fill the rest in myself. It's almost like you get into the results of the election and then you're counting the votes coming in, and what did we vote for? Well, I know we voted for Biden because we covered the story. Well, here's Marianne Williamson's results coming in. Oh, well, she's not doing too well. Well, that's interesting. Well, what was she saying to people that she'd do for them? Well, I don't know. That bit's missing. They never told us. The problem with these ministers, Joe Biden, the General of the Army, Nancy Pelosi, all these people, retard, they don't possess the human logic and intelligence required for a responsible position in broadcasting and MSNBC. These presenters, dumb, they don't possess the intellectual capacity and knowledge of understanding which is required to be a professional, competent organisation with the responsibility of the nation and world. It is literally like going into a primary school of children and asking them to run the world. This is the problem. And this is what we've got with this select committee guy who had, Ofcom up on there. We need people like him. People who have got the intellectual capacity. And not only people who have got I just can't believe how these people can make a monitor. It lights up. It's a monitor. That's what it does. It's got X-axis and Y-axis and pixels, right? When you make a monitor, you've got to make circuit boards and all these things that Bill Gates was meant to specialise in. Microsoft computers, software. It's not missing. When Jeremy Vine goes and gets the election results, you don't have the graph chart go up and then it vanish. Oh, there's part of the screen missing, but where is it? Oh, we don't want to cover that part, and we've got, x-axis and y-axis pixels 603 to 604 are missing. There's no data entry there. We've left that blank, but this is the election you're covering. You're giving misinformation. You're giving malinformation, incomplete data. And that is what these news channels are doing about the elections. They're giving incomplete data. And that is actually misinformation. Yet we've got Neil Mohan and YouTube saying that they're taking people's channels down for either lying or giving malinformation or misinformation. And RFK says they've invented a new term, malinformation. Now, if you are putting a stamp on something and you're informing the public about all entries of an election and then all results of an election, if there's part of that missing, that is a defective mark, a defective image, and that is a defective monitor if a couple of the pixels aren't working. And this is why they don't want you to see it. They want to try and cover it up, censor it, pretend it doesn't exist, right? You either cover the election or you don't, right? Well, they've got why do the TV even cover the election? Why don't they just completely and totally ignore the whole thing as if it didn't exist? Well, actually, they'd be pushed for trying, because I can bet you that Parliament and the White House would actually pull something which would try and, it would say that, well, the BBC is partly taxpayer owned. So while we've still got the BBC, they can't not cover the election because it's in the interest of the public, because the public voted for it. And that's the key, public interest. The license fee payer, the thing is, what is in the public's interest in law? Well, that's the voter. The voters who vote for Parliament. You can't say the people who elect the government who make up the rules for the BBC. You can't say that the elections aren't in the public's interest, because who makes the rules up for the BBC? Who makes the law up for these companies? Now, the fact is that the voter actually makes up is meant to have a say in the legislation that all of these channels are operating on. And I would say that even movie channels and so forth. So who is going to govern the country? And who is going to make the laws up for the television stations, even the private ones? That's in the interest of the viewer. It's in the interest of the viewer. If you watch Netflix, and Netflix has law that is decided on by the government, then it's in the interest of Netflix viewers. The election is in the interest of Netflix viewers who's going to win the election. Now, that means that the whole thing is either in the interest or not. Now, you can't have part of it in their interest, right? Now, even if and the thing is, even if they're pro-Biden, it's actually in the interests, really, of the voter who the competition to the person they're voting is for. Because if you are voting for someone in an election, you need to be informed of what the opposition's doing to know what's actually going to happen if you don't turn up to vote. And this is where Biden's mind explodes and actually blows up, because his intelligence can't actually handle it. This is when the general of the army, in control of nuclear weapons, he can't handle the truth, because a military officer needs to know, he gathers information about his enemy. Weapons inspectors, intel, espionage, spying, they need to know what capabilities their opposition have in order to defeat them. Now, don't you think the voters who they want to vote for Biden, do the voters have an interest and right to know what the opposition is going to do if they don't turn up to vote at all? That means that you're compromising the entire country. It don't matter whether you want them to turn up and vote for Biden or not, because if they decide not to vote, they need to know what's going to happen if they don't vote at all. Well, the alternative is going to happen to them, you docile retards. You don't get it, because they don't have the intellectual capacity to understand it, and they don't want to understand it because all they want to do is win. They don't actually want to, it's like you want the truth, you can't handle the truth. It's almost like the military not wanting to know anything about the Russians. The American general would say it would be insane to not want to know anything about the Russians. Only about their own weapons. They're desperate to know about them. The problem is they know all about Marianne Williamson and RFK. And that's the problem. So all the people who have got a right and interest to vote for Biden have actually got a legal, not right, it's actually compulsory for them to be informed in what is going to happen to their country if they don't turn up to vote. Even if they don't vote for RFK or Marianne Williamson, if they don't turn up to vote at all, what could potentially happen, right? And that is, they need to actually know everyone who is entered into the election and who's running and what they're going to be doing. And this is the problem. This is why you got freedom of the press, because if you didn't, then you wouldn't even be informed on what could potentially happen if you don't act. It's not all about what you're going to do if you do act. It's about what could potentially happen if you don't act. And this is the problem. It clearly says out in the First Amendment, freedom of the press, it actually means freedom to be able to access press. Because otherwise, no one might, even if you wanted to print it yourself, they might refuse to access paper. What happens if, we bought all the ink and paper and we refused to sell it to Rupert Murdoch? Then he'd start complaining, wouldn't he? He'd say, I've got a right to the paper, I've got a right to it. Oh, have you now, Rupert Murdoch? Oh, have you got a right to the paper and ink? I see. But, it says you've got a right to publish, but never says you've got a right to ink or paper. No, well, I must have if I've got a freedom of the press. I must have a right to paper. Well, actually, I own it all. I own everything. Well, but you're not selling it to someone else. This is it.